Hello everyone! Welcome back to our channel. Today, I'd like you to think about something. Have you ever noticed that life seems to repeat itself? Perhaps not exactly. The people may change. The places may change. The details may change. And yet, somehow, the lesson feels familiar, very familiar. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. You promise yourself you won't make the same mistake again. And for a while, everything goes well. Then one day, you find yourself in a similar situation, making a similar choice, feeling a similar frustration. And suddenly, a question appears. Haven't I learned this already? It is a very human question. Most people ask it at some point, again, and again, and again. Imagine standing beside the ocean. A wave reaches the shore, then another, then another, then another. Each wave looks different, and yet, they all seem strangely familiar. Life sometimes feels the same way. Different situations, different faces, different years. Yet somehow, the same lesson keeps returning. Why? Perhaps you've noticed this with worry. Many people have. You worry about something. A conversation, a decision, a future event. You spend hours thinking about it. Perhaps days, perhaps weeks. Then eventually, the situation passes. And what happens? Often, the thing you feared never happens. For a brief moment, you learn something. You tell yourself, I worried too much. And yet, months later, another situation appears. And once again, you worry. Again, and again, and again. Why? If the lesson was learned, why does it return? Or think about comparison. Most people know comparison can steal joy. We hear this advice everywhere. Books teach it. Teachers teach it. Life teaches it. And yet, how many people compare themselves anyway? Perhaps you've done it. Most people have. You compare your progress, your career, your appearance, your achievements. You know comparison is unhelpful. You know it creates suffering. You know it steals peace, and yet the habit returns. Why? If the lesson was understood, why must it be taught again? Life has a curious way of doing this. The same lesson often wears different clothes. Imagine a teacher entering a classroom. On Monday, the lesson appears as a math problem. On Tuesday, the lesson appears as a story. On Wednesday, the lesson appears as a question. The appearance changes. The lesson remains. Perhaps life works in the same way. One year, the lesson arrives through work. Another year, it arrives through relationships. Another year, it arrives through failure. Another year, it arrives through success. Different forms. Same lesson. Maybe you've noticed this in language learning too. At first, many learners believe fluency comes from knowing more. More words, more grammar, more expressions. So they study and study and study. Then eventually, they discover something surprising. The real challenge was never vocabulary. It was confidence, or consistency, or patience. The lesson was hiding somewhere else. Then later, the same lesson returns. A difficult conversation, a frustrating plateau, a period of slow progress. And once again, life asks the same question. Can you be patient? Can you trust the process? Can you continue? The language changes. The lesson remains. Imagine a tree. Every year, winter arrives. Every year, the leaves disappear. Every year, the tree looks empty. And every year, spring returns. New leaves appear. New growth appears. Again, and again, and again. The cycle repeats, not because the tree failed to learn, because growth often happens through repetition. Perhaps people are the same. Perhaps we expect learning to happen once, but life prefers repetition. Imagine learning to play the piano. You do not play a song once. You play it many times. The same notes, the same melody, the same movements, again and again and again. Eventually, something changes. The song becomes part of you. Maybe life teaches the same way. The lesson repeats until it becomes part of you, not something you know, something you are. There is a difference, a very important difference. Most people know patience is important. Fewer people become patient. Most people know kindness matters. Fewer people become kind. Most people know comparison is harmful. Fewer people stop comparing. Knowledge is quick. Transformation is slow. Very slow. Imagine planting a seed. The first rain falls. Nothing happens. The second rain falls. Still nothing. The third rain falls. Still nothing. If you only looked at the surface, you might think nothing is changing. But beneath the soil, the seed is listening. The seed is preparing. The seed is changing. And perhaps life lessons work the same way. The first lesson arrives. Nothing changes. The second lesson arrives. Still nothing. The third lesson arrives. Still nothing. Then one day, something happens. The lesson finally takes root. Not because the lesson changed, because you changed. Perhaps that is why life seems repetitive. Perhaps life is not trying to annoy us. Perhaps life is trying to teach us, patiently, quietly, again, and again, and again. Imagine a river. The river does not force its way through stone. It touches the stone, again, and again, and again. Year after year, the stone changes, slowly, almost invisibly. But eventually, the impossible happens. The river shapes the stone, not through force, through repetition. Perhaps wisdom grows the same way. One experience, one conversation, one mistake, one disappointment, one realization, then another, then another, then another. Nothing seems dramatic. Nothing seems life-changing. And yet, something is happening. Something is always happening. Maybe that is why some lessons follow us for years. Not because we are failing. Not because we are broken. Not because we are incapable. But because understanding often arrives slowly. Much more slowly than we expect. And perhaps that raises another question. A deeper question. What if life is not repeating the lesson? What if life is simply checking whether we are ready to understand it? And perhaps that is where our story begins to go deeper. Perhaps life is not asking, "Did you hear the lesson?" Perhaps life is asking, "Did you become the lesson?" There is a difference, a very important difference. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. Imagine someone tells you, "Be patient." The advice sounds simple, reasonable, wise. You agree immediately. Of course, patience is important. Most people know that. But then life creates a situation, a long wait, an uncertain future, a goal that takes longer than expected. And suddenly, the lesson returns. Can you be patient now? Not in theory, not in conversation. Now, life often asks that question. Again, and again, and again. Imagine a student learning English. At first, everything feels exciting. New words, new expressions, new possibilities. Progress seems fast, visible, encouraging. Then something changes. The progress slows, the excitement fades, the improvement becomes harder to see, and a new lesson appears. Can you continue? Can you continue when motivation disappears? Can you continue when progress feels invisible? Can you continue when the results arrive slowly? Perhaps the real lesson was never English. Perhaps the lesson was persistence. Life has a curious way of hiding one lesson inside another. Imagine a gardener planting flowers. The gardener waters the soil. One day passes. Nothing happens. A week passes. Still nothing. 2 weeks pass. Still nothing. The gardener could become frustrated. Many people would. The gardener could say, "This isn't working." Many people do. But the gardener continues, watering, waiting, trusting, again, and again, and again, and eventually, the flowers appear. Perhaps life is constantly asking the same question. Can you trust what you cannot yet see? Many people spend years learning this lesson, not because it is difficult to understand, because it is difficult to live. There is a difference. Imagine someone saying, "Do not compare yourself to others." Most people know this advice. They have heard it before, many times, and yet, life keeps teaching it. You open social media, the lesson returns. You hear about someone else's success, the lesson returns. You compare your progress, the lesson returns. Again, and again, and again. Why? Because life is not testing your memory. Life is testing your understanding. A lesson is not finished when you can repeat it. A lesson is finished when you can live it. Imagine a river flowing toward the ocean. Along the way, it meets obstacles, rocks, branches, sharp turns, narrow passages. The obstacles look different, but perhaps they are teaching the same thing. Keep moving, keep flowing, keep going. The form changes. The lesson remains. Maybe you've noticed this in relationships. Most people eventually learn that communication matters. They know it. They believe it. They agree with it. Then one day, a misunderstanding appears. The lesson returns. Listen carefully. Speak honestly. Be patient. The lesson appears again. Not because life forgot, because life is giving another opportunity to practice. Perhaps practice is the true language of growth. Imagine learning to play basketball. A coach explains how to shoot. You listen. You understand. At least, you think you do. But then comes the practice. One shot, then another, then another. Hundreds, thousands. Only then does the movement become natural. Life seems to follow the same pattern. Explanation first. Practice later. Knowledge first. Experience later. The lesson appears. Then life asks, "Would you like to practice?" Again, and again, and again. Perhaps this is why wisdom often looks simple. Wise people are not carrying secret information. Often, they are carrying familiar lessons. Lessons they have practiced many times. Lessons they have failed many times. Lessons they have revisited many times. The lesson itself is not new. The relationship with the lesson is new. Imagine learning balance while riding a bicycle. The lesson is simple. Stay balanced. Yet no one masters balance after hearing the instruction once. You wobble. You fall. You try again. The lesson returns. Again, and again, and again. Eventually, balance becomes natural. Perhaps emotional lessons work the same way. Patience, trust, forgiveness, courage, gratitude. The lesson returns until it becomes part of who you are, not part of what you know. Part of who you are? Maybe that is why life seems repetitive. Imagine a teacher helping a student solve a problem. The teacher does not repeat the lesson because the student is hopeless. The teacher repeats the lesson because the student is learning. Slowly, patiently, one step at a time. Perhaps life is doing the same thing. Perhaps the repeated lesson is not evidence of failure. Perhaps it is evidence of growth. Evidence that life has not given up on teaching you. Evidence that there is still something valuable to learn. Imagine standing beside the ocean. Wave after wave reaches the shore. None of them seem important, not individually, but together, they shape the coastline. Perhaps life lessons work the same way. One reminder, one mistake, one challenge, one conversation, one disappointment, one realization, then another, then another, then another. Nothing seems dramatic, yet slowly, the shape of your life changes. And perhaps that leads us to an even deeper question. If life keeps returning the lesson, what finally causes the lesson to stay? What changes? What is the moment when knowledge becomes understanding? And perhaps that is where our story begins to go deeper. Perhaps the lesson stays when it stops feeling like a lesson. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. There was a time when you had to remind yourself constantly, be patient, stay calm, keep going, trust the process. You repeated the words again and again and again. Sometimes they helped, sometimes they didn't. But eventually, something changed. The words became quieter, not because they disappeared, because they became part of you. Imagine learning to drive. At first, every movement requires attention. The mirrors, the pedals, the steering wheel, the speed. Everything feels important. Everything feels difficult. Everything feels new. Then months pass, years pass, and one day, something surprising happens. You are driving, but you are no longer thinking about driving. You are thinking about your day, your plans, your family, your future. The skill became part of you. Perhaps life lessons work the same way. At first, the lesson feels external. Something you must remember, something you must practice, something you must force. But eventually, the lesson becomes natural. Not because you mastered it perfectly, because you lived it repeatedly. Imagine someone learning gratitude. At first, gratitude may feel like an exercise, a habit, a reminder. They write things down. They make an effort. They consciously look for good things. But over time, something changes. They begin noticing beauty automatically. A quiet morning, a kind conversation, a warm cup of coffee, a peaceful walk. The lesson has moved from the mind to the heart, from effort to instinct. Perhaps understanding always follows that path. Imagine a river. At first, the river seems weak, small, narrow, easy to ignore. But year after year, it follows the same path again and again and again. Eventually, the path becomes permanent. The river no longer searches for a direction. The direction has become part of the landscape. Perhaps repeated lessons do the same thing. They create new paths inside us, new ways of thinking, new ways of responding, new ways of seeing. Not overnight, not in a dramatic moment. Slowly, quietly, patiently. Life seems to love patience more than most people do. Imagine a young tree. The tree bends easily. A strong wind arrives. The tree bends. Another wind arrives. The tree bends again. Years pass. Storms come and go. The tree continues growing. Its roots grow deeper. Its trunk grows stronger. One day, another storm arrives. The wind is just as strong, perhaps stronger. But the tree is different now. The storm is not new. The tree is. Perhaps that is what growth really is. Not the disappearance of difficulty, the development of strength. Not the disappearance of challenges, the development of wisdom. Maybe you've noticed this in your own life. There may be challenges that once felt overwhelming, conversations that once felt frightening, situations that once felt impossible. And now, perhaps they are still difficult, but not in the same way. Something changed. You changed. The lesson did its work. Imagine a learner speaking English. Years ago, a simple conversation felt intimidating. Every sentence required courage. Every mistake felt important. Every pause felt uncomfortable. Then time passes. Conversation after conversation. Story after story. Mistake after mistake. And eventually, something changes. The learner is still learning, still improving, still growing, but the fear becomes smaller. The tension becomes smaller. The resistance becomes smaller. The lesson has taken root. Not because English became easier, because the learner became stronger. Life often teaches this lesson everywhere. A person learns patience, not through one delay, through many delays. A person learns confidence, not through one success, through many attempts. A person learns forgiveness, not through one conversation, through many disappointments. Again, and again, and again. The repetition is not punishment. Perhaps it is preparation. Imagine a sculptor working with stone. One strike changes very little, almost nothing. A second strike, still very little. A third strike, a fourth, a fifth, 100th, 1,000th. Eventually, a shape appears. People often notice the final result, rarely the thousands of small moments that created it. Perhaps life works the same way. People notice wisdom. They notice confidence. They notice calmness. They notice resilience. What they do not see are the thousands of repeated lessons, the thousands of ordinary moments, the thousands of opportunities to learn. Maybe that is why growth feels invisible, because most of it happens beneath the surface, like roots beneath the earth, like a seed preparing to grow, like a river shaping stone, like morning slowly replacing darkness. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, and yet everything changes. Perhaps life keeps teaching the same lesson for a simple reason. The lesson is important, very important. Too important to learn only once. Too important to hear only once. Too important to understand only halfway. So life returns, patiently, again, and again, and again. Not to punish us, not to embarrass us, not to remind us of failure, but to give us another opportunity to grow, another opportunity to understand, another opportunity to become. And perhaps that is the hidden beauty of repeated lessons. They are evidence that growth is still possible, evidence that the story is not finished, evidence that life still believes in what we can become. So if you remember one thing from this story, remember this. The lesson returns because the lesson matters. The lesson returns because growth takes time. The lesson returns because understanding grows slowly. And one day, without even realizing it, you may discover something beautiful. The lesson that once felt difficult has become natural. The lesson that once felt distant has become familiar. The lesson that once lived in your mind now lives in your life. And perhaps that is when the lesson finally stays. Not because you memorized it, not because you mastered it, but because you became it. Thank you for spending this time with me. And see you in the next story.